In today's climate in 2024, what do you think is the most important political issue people should be paying attention to?
Well, here's the thing, is that obviously the biggest thing on many people's minds right now is the genocide that's going on in Gaza right now. And to the certain extent I know it's also not really shown to people that much as well. But for a lot of people, the U.S. funding, the killing of so far 40-something thousand people. Okay. The U.S. killing of so far 40-something thousand people. U.S. supplying the bombs and the ammunition for Israel's killing of 40-something thousand people in Palestine, and the ongoing occupation. That's what's happening. One of the things that's happening right now. So a lot of people are focused on it. And unfortunately, it's making a lot of people feel powerless because, we see millions of people around the world saying, fuck this. We don't want this. And I think it's obvious that very few people want it. And that's not stopping it, right? And same thing that happened over the last 20 years with the war in Iraq. Like millions of people around the world were out in the streets saying, we don't want this. But the reason why we feel powerless is because sometimes even folks that are organizing, folks that are on the left, give a wrong idea of how power works, right? We've been telling people sometimes, like, just lift your voice, just use your voice, say your truth, and truth to power, we'll say, things like that. But the reality is, under capitalism, the people with the capital are who has the power, the ruling class. And how they have the capital is through the exploitation of labor, through the billions of people that work for them, and through them making a profit off the difference of what they pay you versus the value created by that labor. So if we want to exercise power right now, while we're under the system, what it would take is a general strike. What it would take, and even before you got to the point of having a general strike, which ostensibly would shut everything down, and you could then hold profit hostage, right? And say, look, nothing moves until this policy happens, that policy happens, this policy happens. Now, the truth is, we're not there yet because we haven't been organizing around those things. Some of it has been because we've been just saying, just organizing protest to protest. But it's a place that we can get to. There is a lot. Over the last 3.5 years, there's been 3,000 strikes and work stoppages in the United States. It's the biggest strike wave we've had in the United States since the 70s. And it's growing. Whereas, where people are looking for where their power is, how to even affect even local policy changes, not to mention national and international policy. So I think, that's the next big wave. We saw what got reported right after George Floyd during the Black Lives Matter were the protests and the expressions of outrage. What didn't get, talked about were those 3,000 strikes and work stoppages, many of which were happening during that time about that sort of thing. In the Midwest, for instance, a bunch of people that worked at restaurants said, we don't want the police served here. And they shut down the restaurant and did that. Now, that was the thing that they were asking for. That's what they wanted. And they won it through doing that. And that's might be seen as little, but it's a thing that they wanted and they got, and they were able to do it through the withholding of labor. There were bigger things that happened that were not as connected to Black Lives Matter. But during COVID, when everybody thought that people needed respirators, the Boeing airline workers, they went on strike and they demanded, they were like, we don't want to make jet airplanes anymore. We want to make respirators. You know, you had things like that happening all over the place. You had stuff more recently like Oakland teachers and LA teachers and Chicago teachers who went on strike and said, you know what, we're not just asking for higher wages. They won that and they stayed out on strike. And they said, we want showers and shelter for the students that go here that are homeless. We want, and we want control of the budget for the teachers and the parents. And that's what they won, at least they won that for portions of the budget. And so we're seeing radical things happen from people figuring out how to take power where they are. And that's connected to some of the bigger things that are happening. And there's a way that we can look at things where we feel powerless, like there's nothing I could do. I think a lot of times people won't pay attention to it because you feel like nothing I could do about it, right? And that feeling is connected to a reality, right? But I think that just has to do with strategically how we are organizing. And once we start organizing what I think we need, which is a mass militant radical labor movement that uses the withholding of labor as a strategy and tactic to make policy changes and build toward a larger revolutionary movement. Once we start that, then people will start feeling their power.
I'm glad that you answered that question. I posed a question to you about what problem is going on, and your answer mostly involved the solution, which I think is missing in a lot of this discussion. I do want to use this platform to say I am disturbed and disappointed and outraged by what's happening to Palestinian people right now. I haven't been as vocal about this issue as I have been in the past, partly because of what you've been talking about, that feeling of powerlessness. But I do feel like that there is a shift coming because these images are hard to ignore. And I feel like what we're seeing right now is a younger generation of people being motivated to action by just the sheer inhumanity of what they're seeing on social media, which is providing an alternative where mainstream media is ignoring the problem.
Yeah. I mean, to get rid of apartheid in South Africa, some of the things that happened are things that we could utilize here, which was the boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The reason why that works, because normally you might hear me talking about the idea that boycotts are usually thrown out there as an answer to strikes and are not as effective. In this case, when it's coupled with divestment movements where they are getting large organizations such as universities or other corporations to divest from a country, that actually was very effective with South Africa. But the other thing that happened during that time, you had longshore workers, specifically here in the Bay Area, as well as other places, that said, we're not unloading any ships from South Africa, and we're not loading anything that goes to South Africa, right? And then you had other factory workers, like I think there was a 3M factory, maybe it's 4M, I forget the name of it, but where you had solidarity strikes between somebody goes on strike in South Africa and a company that's related to that, business chain of distribution also went on strike here. So you had all those things happening to get rid of just the policy of apartheid. I'm not saying everything is, great in South Africa now, but they don't have apartheid, and that was done through a movement. And that sort of thing can happen here. And right now, what would need to happen is something that could force divestment, and that would be strikes.
Yeah, well, like I said, I like that this conversation is focused on outcomes and objectives as opposed to just, I mean, as much as important it is to educate people on what the problem is, you kind of have to follow that up with, okay, but what do we do about it? And I think those are pretty realistic objectives.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way I like to think about things is like, you know, seeing a problem and figuring out what there is that's been done and what could, you know.
Absolutely.
Recognize where you got the game. We got our own style, got our own slang. Northern California is a West Coast thing. This is the history of the Bay. Recognize where you got the game. We got our own style, got our own slang. Northern California is a West Coast thing. This is the history of the Bay.